welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Board of Trade podcast. I'm Jaipaul.
I'm Vijay.
And it's been a while since we've done one of these together. I realized for a second, I almost forgot what the routine is. I didn't know where my coffee was. I forgot to take notes. This whole thing is you take one podcast off and you're suddenly a newbie all over again.
You were out of country for 2 weeks.
It was exciting. Yeah. A little bit of work stuff, which I'll touch on, I'm sure, and some vacation time as well.
Yeah. So we had a great pod with Aaron from Better Way Alliance. So that we still delivered the content.
And believe me, I know I'm a passenger on this. You are always delivering the content, but we'll get to Aaron and be able to build on last pod on this one really shortly. But no, it was fantastic. I love the conversation, and I love how much energy, enthusiasm he brought to it as well. That was really great. But before we get into that, so we've already kind of like it's almost like we're professionals. We like this little preview. Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about international affairs. We're going to talk about Better Way Alliance. But before we get to that, our a little bit of a local perspective. The news story in Brampton right now. Actually, I don't know if it's a news story. The story among those who we're speaking with that perhaps deserves to be a news story that it doesn't feel like people are talking about enough is it's summer. It's people are out there on their bikes, and bike lanes are now become a conversation, increasingly so. Here in Brampton once again. And unfortunately, bike lanes are often a conversation item in Brampton for all the wrong reasons. And that's because people in Brampton, or at the very least, enough people in Brampton and those who make decisions in Brampton don't seem to like bike lanes.
No, that's right.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on? And then let's talk about why we're confused by what's happening here and disappointed about what's happening here.
So at council this week, it was pretty interesting because, we've had this back and forth on bike lanes with some councillors in the past with respect to Howden during the budget cycle, and we are once again sort of in this debate on for the bike lanes on Charolais, and in particular, Councillor Keenan and Councillor Medeiros spoke quite passionately about the engagement they did with residents who were upset about the bike lanes, and the vast majority of which apparently opposed the bike lanes. They did a survey, and I think it was like 80%, 90%, something like that, of folks reported that they wanted those bike lanes removed. Now, what I think is interesting about this story, we don't need to relitigate how the Board of Trade feels about bike lanes and what we've talked about.
I'd love to relitigate at some point, by the way. We do a special relitigation episode.
Sure. But what I found, what was interesting to me is Councillor Santos, who is the de facto active transportation advocate on council. She made an interesting point that I've been thinking about, and I think it kind of cuts through all of our advocacy. She correctly identified in my mind that because there's a lot of construction on Main, on Queen, on Church now, there's a lot of rerouting traffic, right? Folks going through smaller side streets to avoid the construction on the big streets. So Charolais has seen a lot more cars than normal. As a result, folks are feeling frustrated when they see that 20% of the road, whatever it is taken up by a bike lane. That is short term, right? Eventually, these construction projects will come to an end, and the traffic will sort of stabilize, normalize. And we will have kicked ourselves that we've gotten rid of this bike lane because of our short-term frustration. And I thought that was really smart.
That's an excellent insight. That's an excellent insight. And as I'm thinking about that anecdotally, I can think about that in the part of the city that I'm in right now. And I've actually had this thought because Williams Parkway is similarly being completely taken up all the way from Dixie through to Highway 10. And that's the route that I take to drive to work every day. And I have had two thoughts on that. Among them, though, is A, an incredible frustration, but B, it's completely impassable for any cyclist in the interim. But what's happening is all that traffic, therefore, now is becoming rerouted onto streets like Vauden and others where there are bike lanes. And I can see that exact same analogy you're describing in the downtown of Brampton playing out in the ward that I'm in as well. not because of the Vaughan bike lane, which has been a contentious issue in the past, but because of the Williams Parkway construction.
Yeah,
that's a great insight.
It is, and
it just feels like a communication issue now, more than a structural issue or a road design issue.
And what I loved is Councillor Santos brought up the Riverwalk, and she talked about how the Riverwalk is a celebrated achievement for the city of Brampton. They secured provincial and federal funding, and we've talked about it for years, and I've been consulted on it, and I'm a resident in that area. All of that. Now that it's happening, residents are frustrated by the lack of trees and the construction. And she said, if we were to listen to residents and their short-term frustrations, and now cancel Riverwalk because a few folks are frustrated by the construction and the lack of trees and whatnot, we would be going back on what we were elected to do.
Sure, and decades of advocacy.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought that was really smart for a couple of reasons, because I think it correctly identified this inherent problem with democracy, that even if the vast majority of those folks who live on Charolais, if they oppose the bike lanes, you were elected to do the unpopular thing from time to time.
Yeah.
If not, if we were just listening to the whims of the majority, then we don't need elected representatives. We could just have folks vote on every single policy issue. But we don't have that system.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really smart, a really smart thing to bring up, and I just want to congratulate her for her advocacy. I mean, where it ended is I think a fairly good compromise. I think they're kind of punting the issue down to August, and they're going to look at an advocacy plan to get the province to step in for boulevard design for those bike lanes. But which I think is a superior model anyway. And same with Howden.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was just a fascinating council meeting.
Really interesting. No, and I appreciate that perspective a lot. Now, this is all obviously speculative, but you talked about councillors going with the popular opinion, perhaps at the expense of that, which is right not just in the moment, but definitely right in the longer term.
Yeah.
What's your point of view? We're in a municipal election year. Yeah. Is there an increase? You're an observer at council meetings every week. I don't go quite as often as you do. Is there an increased sensitivity in your mind to how council is responding to the voice of residents? Because many of these folks, and in fact, I think all of them but one, as far as I'm aware, are intending on putting their names on a ballot again this fall.
That's right. It's sort of, it kind of feels like silly season. It feels like... politicians are always weird during election periods, and I think Brampton's no different. There is, and I think all the way we've seen this from the budget itself to the bike lane debates, there is a real sensitivity around constituent engagement and resident engagement and the will of the residents. Because I wonder if something like this were voted on or discussed a year from now, right after the election, how would the tenor change?
And there's this part of me that feels very strongly that is a big part of it.
Yeah.
If I were a councillor, and I'm not naming it, I'm not throwing anyone under the proverbial bike here. This is just more a broad statement. If I were a councillor who felt perhaps less confident or concerned about the safety of my seat, one of the things I might be worried about is the possibility of a candidate because if it is poll at 90% of folks don't like the bike lane, then it's very conceivable that you could run as the anti-bike lane candidate in that ward and upset an incumbent based on just that one policy item.
Yeah.
So I can see it's short-sighted. I'm not endorsing it, but in a very human way, I can understand why this whole process is really fraught more than usual right now.
For sure.
Because we have a number of councillors, I think, who are feeling perhaps not as confident as they would have because the broader economic condition, affordability, there are real issues in our city right now that I think the residents are unhappy with. And any one of these issues can become a tipping point. If allowed to become. And so, there may be some effort here to nip some of these issues in the bud, lest they become weaponized by opponents during an election cycle.
Yeah.
And in the same manner that, Councillor Santos, is rightfully to point out, like, maybe we need to wait till the construction side. It almost feels like we have to have a moratorium on certain decisions until election season is done.
Yeah.
Because to your point, there are things that are in the best interest of the community in the long run that are unpopular in the moment.
Yeah.
But if we're leaving them, it's not a bug of democracy. It's a bug of like human nature.
Yes.
Then it's almost like we have to remove them from even being like, we have to have a moratorium on these issues during times when politicians are fighting for their jobs, because they're not going to make the decisions that are popular at the expense of the decisions that are good.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think building on that, municipal government is inherently biased towards property owners, homeowners, because that's where the funding comes from.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I came from a session this morning, workshopping various municipal issues for the election period, and the interesting thing about Toronto, there are many interesting things, but what's happened is there's a change in the political dynamic in the city because 60% of the population rents, and so now there is a real acknowledgement that homeowners in Etobicoke and Scarborough and the suburbs of Toronto are now in competition with folks who rent and who are contributing indirectly to the property tax base through their rent, but are not direct contributors. And so we've seen a lot of movement on rental protection, the rent eviction bylaw, for example, in Toronto, and the multi-unit residential acquisition MURA policy in Toronto, and all of that. In Brampton, we don't yet see that because we don't have the assessment value that Toronto has. So, we are maybe a bit more limited in what we can kind of conceive of because our political class is so answerable to a certain class of resident.
It's a brilliant insight, and I wonder, so a couple things on that, and both are just sort of musings more than actual observations. One is that we recognizing the response to issues of affordability in housing in communities like Brampton are going to be addressed in part through more purpose-built rental, and more rental and more favorable conditions to encourage landowners to produce to create rental situations.
Yes.
And so we're going to and we're seeing council are taking a little bit of that up. There have been some projects that have been pushed through and have been prioritized through the approval process because they are going to be purpose-built rentals to create options in our community. So we're going to see perhaps a little bit of a shift. But what I'm also interested about is, I think your observation is very right. But what's interesting is that I do believe we do have a very large rental population here in Brampton.
Yeah.
It's just invisible.
Exactly.
Because what we don't have here are low-rise buildings or apartments that are designated for rental properties. We do, but not a lot of them.
Yeah.
What we have are a lot of folks who live in basements or who are renting homes.
That's right.
But they're invisible renters in this community. So it's an interesting thing that you're describing here, where Toronto is having to be responsive because their rental community is more visible.
Yeah.
I would argue, I can't give you percentages, but it certainly feels like we have a critical mass of renters in Brampton. I know many.
I agree.
But the reality is we don't see them in the same way, and thus they don't have that same voice.
Yeah.
And I wonder again if this is a conversation that's more about communication and mobilization than it is necessarily about structural change.
No, I completely agree. It's a lot easier to organize renters when they all live in a purpose-built rental property, right? It's a lot harder when they're sort of dispersed among single-family homes, and that's also a very good insight. And I wonder, first of all, I wonder how many renters there are in Brampton, period. But I also wonder what proportion of them are newcomers or just folks who are not caught up in our electoral system itself. Because I think that changes dynamics a bit as well. But yeah, fascinating stuff. And I think a lot of this thinking is going to go into our election workshopping as well. I think the two big issues for me, top of mind, are housing. A lot of our solutions for the affordable housing crisis is market driven, and the market is in free fall. We just had a meeting with the budget team. Planning revenues are down. and development charges don't seem to be coming in the way that
wasn't the most positive meeting we've had.
Exactly.
Very congenial, very friendly, but yeah, they were not happy.
Yeah. And then the other one is transit, right? And the operating costs for transit are increasing because ridership is falling as well. So.
This is a piece, and let's come back to it because I think this is something that I don't really know what my point of view is yet, but I just want to sort of posit it here for something for you and I to think about as we work on the election strategy. Is this the way, and you're touching on this broader issue here, not just of landowners, but how the outcomes of elections are determined by the constituents that are able to vote. But the reality is that if we want a functioning community here in Brampton, we really have to find some way to connect the needs of those who are not eligible to vote, and we sometimes think that but age, but what I don't think we talk about enough is in the context of newcomers.
Yes.
And a community like ours, there's a huge population of individuals who contribute to this community, but more importantly are affected by the decisions made in this community who don't have the right yet because they don't have citizenship to engage in the electoral process. So individuals like yourself and myself get to make decisions on their behalf.
Yeah.
This is understood. I don't know that we think enough about what that means in a place like Brampton when that's such a large part of the population, and that when we engage with folks to talk about what election issues are, I fear therefore that there's a natural predisposition to consider the needs of those who are who are eligible to vote at the expense of those who are maybe not a majority, but a large silent constituency here.
Yeah.
And I wonder, as we start looking at our own election strategy here, I think that's something we should be mindful of, is how do we encourage our policy development and the positions we take as a board to ensure that we're being as inclusive as possible of this large silent group in our community who we have to be servicing if we want to have a future in this community. They may not be eligible to vote in this election cycle or a few election cycles. Yeah. But if we're not considering how these people are going to be part of the future of Brampton, then we're really not solutioning it in a way that's going to be meaningful.
No, absolutely not. No, and that's also to say nothing of the fact that these people are our workers. They're our workforce. Yeah. And Brampton businesses and folks even outside the community rely on Brampton workers for the continuity of the economy. So, all the more reason. Let's think about this. I don't know that, and maybe we don't have to do anything differently. Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're thinking about it as part of our among the factors we're considering when we're developing positions.
Absolutely.
Are we making sure we're speaking enough for those who can't speak in these situations?
I like that. I like that a lot.
Cool. Yeah. So that's our sort of municipal little catch up. Mm-hmm. But there's been a fun week. We got a chance to do something kind of unique for us at the Board of Trade, and I'd love for you to talk about it because you played a role in organizing it.
Yeah.
And we referred referenced at the last podcast. We had Aaron on from Better Way Alliance. And we've had the opportunity to collaborate with him on a few things, which you all went into on the last podcast. So do listen if folks haven't already. But the cool project of the moment was collaborating with the folks at Better Way to organize a Queen's Park Day. Yeah. We were able to bring a number of Brampton businesses and community leaders down to Toronto for some engagement with MPPs. Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, what we achieved, and how you felt the whole day went? Because I thought it was a fascinating day, and I have a lot that I learned on Tuesday.
Yeah. So for folks who didn't listen to the last podcast, Better Way Alliance is a business organization, a membership-based organization that focuses primarily on protecting and looking for investment into small business, and in particular the very small business. So we're talking at times micro businesses, 1 to 9 employees. Obviously, but the official definition of small business, as we know, can range anywhere from 1 to 99 employees to all the way to 599 employees, which isn't very small. So they're really looking at the mom and pop demographic and the Main Street businesses. They've been doing a Queen's Park Advocacy Day called Better Business Day for a number of years now. And I went last year and I loved it. I loved the focus of it. I loved the fact that there was this group that was speaking on behalf of small business, which makes up the vast majority of businesses in the province. And so I've been in touch with Aaron for a little while now, and we wanted to partner on an advocacy day between the Brampton Board of Trade and the Better Way Alliance, and we got to do that on May 26th. It was, I think it went super well. I thought, it was a great opportunity to bring some members out to engage with elected officials from different party stripes, to connect with each other at the reception that we had at Queen's Park itself. For the folks that we didn't get to meet with, they came to the reception, and it was a nice, good, wholesome environment where we exchanged ideas and had good food and all of that. What I will say is it was logistically cumbersome, and scheduling in meetings with elected officials can be challenging.
I believe you referred to it as the most complicated thing you've done?
Yes, absolutely. and I didn't even do the heavy lifting. It was Aaron who really led all of it, and Better Ways leadership. But I guess for folks who are wondering why do something like this, a Queen's Park Day is great because it's tough to get a minister to come out to Brampton and have a meeting at our office. But if we go to them, there's really no excuse, right? We should be able to fit into the schedule somewhere, even for a 15-minute conversation. So it's a really good opportunity to bang out a number of meetings throughout the day. And it's also just a very legitimizing thing to do, to show up with a delegation, a show of force to not only the folks you're meeting with, but to people who are sort of looking at the schedule and seeing, oh wow, well, the Brampton Board of Trade has brought a delegation. They're hosting a reception with Better Way. Let me check that out. Let's see what they're all about. Yeah. So going to the halls of power to do that, I think is a very productive thing. And we got a shout out during question period as well. So that's always nice. Yeah,
it was fun. It definitely had field trip vibes at times, because there was a bunch of us. Yeah. Not everyone had been to Queen's Park before, so there was a lot of taking pictures and checking things out. And Queen's Park is an impressive building to walk through and take in all that history for sure. It was incredibly productive, but it was also very fun, and I think very much engaged people and showed those who attended how accessible this is. One of the things I'd love for you to talk a little bit about is, I'm assuming, because I think it's a natural default, is when we say we went there and we engaged with leaders, people are going to assume we talked to those who are serving in government, in the government caucus. But we met with opposition MPPs.
Absolutely.
And the majority of our engagements actually were with opposition. And do you want to talk a little bit about why that was? Because I think, to me, that was an important component of what we did on Tuesday, and a little bit different than what we do day in, day out.
So we met with folks from every major party. So the Greens, the NDP, the Liberals, and the PCs. And the reason why we meet with the Liberals, NDP, and Greens, they're the opposition, as you're referring to, is because there are certain roles that opposition folks have within the legislature to be able to advance ideas, right? If we can't get a meeting with someone in the government caucus or the minister, then maybe we go to the shadow minister, right? Or we go to the critic on this portfolio. And they can bring it up in question period, or they could bring it up in committee, or they can, for example, we had a meeting with an individual who said, you don't have access to the legislative library. I do. I can look that up for you, and I can provide you some insight or some data, or I can put in an order paper for you to get this information from the government. They have 30 days to answer this order paper. So there are certain resources that these folks have that we as a public don't, and we might not always be able to get that from the government itself, because they have a million and one other priorities. So that's the value there. And I do want to speak briefly about some of the priorities that we were looking to advance.
Yeah, please.
So Better Way, and so Aaron and myself, we worked on a canon, on a list of issues that we wanted to focus on. It's better if we're specific when we go into these meetings. So the top three asks were, number one, removing the double taxation on insurance for small business. Now, Ontario is one of only two provinces, it's Ontario and Newfoundland, who have two separate taxes that are applied to insurance, and these are various insurance products. In our context, we're looking at general liability insurance,
which every business needs.
Exactly. Now, CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, they put forward a recommendation to remove this double taxation. So in our minds, this should be an easy win. It has multi-partisan support, and this isn't devastating to the bottom line for
the coffers of government.
Exactly.
And in our conversations, my particular group had a different focus, which you're going to get to one of those items. But the notion of insurance, every issue came up in every conversation. None of the folks who we talked about expressed any pushback, and a couple were actually just surprised that this was even still something that was needing to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the first issue, the sort of lowest hanging fruit in our minds. The second issue was really one of our flagship advocacy priorities, which is transit. Specifically, we were looking at, as you know, we're quite outspoken on the Kitchener line. We wanted to have a broader provincial focus, so we wanted the government to sort of reinstate the electrification targets that were once communicated, which is that at one point the entire GO network was to be electrified, which would result in faster trains, also free of CO2 and all of these things. That had been descoped as we've come to learn through an FOI several weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. We're looking at reinstating those plans. The second big priority for transit is our municipal transit agencies are suffering. We used to get operating funding from the province that was cut in the 90s. We're looking to reinstate some of that funding, or looking at ways to support operating writ large for municipalities. And this is something that's come up in our engagement with Brampton Transit and the budget team.
Yeah, and it was very timely. If I can just quick sidebar here. We had our day at Queen's Park on the Tuesday, and I was on the team that was representing the transit priorities. On Monday, you and I had, as we already referred to, had the opportunity to sit down with the City of Brampton's budget team as they're starting to work on the 2027 budget and talking about some of the constraints and the challenges there. And the timing was excellent because we were able to bring up the notion of the lack of funding for transit at the municipal level that the province has now started to hold back, and the impact it was having. But what I was also able to share, which included one of our visits, was with their party's transit critic, the perspective that we had in talking to the city the day before. And that is, when you take away that funding at the municipal level, yes, it hampers the city's ability to grow and maintain their network. But when you layer on top of that the changes that have been made by this government as it pertains to DCs, as a for instance, we've taken away another revenue tool that the cities count upon. And so the city of Brampton is now, they've told us basically it's a twofer. They're not able to get the transit funding they would like to have from the province, but now they also are not able to access some of the funding that they would have gotten from DCs, even though those aren't direct transit funds. Taking away those revenues from the city in general means the city does not have dollars they can otherwise allocate to transit to make up for the lack of transit funding. And so now the city of Brampton, despite having strong ridership, is being forced to have conversations around route rationalization and perhaps even routing reductions or expanding times for service, simply because that funding isn't there. So it was really timely that we got to talk to the city, because I was able to connect these other dots that it's not just transit funding decisions at the province that impact municipal transit, it's all the funding decisions at the provincial level that are ultimately having impact to the transit at the municipal level. And so that transit critic for their party, they were quite energized by that insight and indicated that they would be bringing that forward to Minister Sarkaria. And in fact asked us to write a question that they could bring to question period. Because this is the other benefit of talking to these opposition MPPs, is you and I can have a conversation with an individual at our office or in their office, but it's not really part of the record. But by having our engagement with an opposition MPP, they have the opportunity, if they choose, to raise that question on our behalf in open question period. And now that question is now a matter of the record. And there is a certain degree of accountability there too. So to me, that's another reason where there's value in engaging with these opposition MPPs. But sorry, I took a sidebar here. I want you to get back to that was the second of the key issues.
And the third and the last one is really a better way priority, which is something that does affect some of our members, I will admit, is commercial rent protection. And this was interesting because there was some disagreement, among the group.
We had developers in our group.
Exactly. So, so for folks who are unaware, Better Way has a number of members who have faced massive hikes in their rent. We're talking 30, 40, 50, sometimes 100% increase. Since 2019, we've seen a 142% increase in commercial rent. Why is that? Because there exists no commercial rent protection in the same way that residents have in this province.
That's right.
There's no standard lease agreement for commercial, and you know this quite well. the lease you have with a landlord in a commercial context, it can be whatever you want.
Yeah.
They can figure out, okay, it's during the fall season it's going to be this percentage of rent, and then in the summer we're going to amp it up to whatever percent, and they can figure out whatever arrangement works. And sometimes there are handshake sweetheart deals as a result of this, right? But what Better Way is looking to push for is a commercial bill of rights, a set of basic guarantees that mom and pop, in particular, and Main Street businesses can be afforded, so that there is at least recourse should there be something that happens with their rent, like a massive spike or there's money owing or what have you. There was some disagreement, as I referenced. Partly because we did have some developers in the group, and it was interesting because there's nothing quite like in-person dialogue. When you're online, right? It's easy to disagree, and there's so much context that's missing from a discussion. But when you're in person, there's this natural kind of inclination to cede a certain point, or to find some common ground, or not stir the pot too much, or not to kind of go to elevate temperatures. So I think the result of the discussion on Tuesday was this recognition that, well, commercial rent has gone up tremendously, and there are some actors who are looking to financialize the acquisition of a property to get a big box store instead of some mom and pop. That certainly exists. And that being said, on the other end of things, there are good landlords, and there are landlords that are looking to actually engage in city building and to do something interesting. And there are many folks who want interesting mom and pop independent businesses in cities. So how can we kind of square that tension? And I think we got there on that day, and that I think was one of the most interesting parts of the day for me.
That's great. No, I'm happy to hear that. And you and I haven't had a chance to reconnect, because I've been out of office and you've been out of office in various different things since that day. So I'm really glad we haven't had a chance for you and I to talk about what we got out of that day. But that's great to hear.
Yeah,
I certainly saw it in some of the conversations I was part of as well. And the tenor of that particular topic, what it really took on was, it went from a conversation around a blanket approach to managing these rent situations to a more thoughtful dialogue in the way that you're describing. That was around, we can't legislate everything around bad actors. We can't let the actions of a few determine how all legislation rolls out.
It's the Conestoga College situation.
But we have bad actors. And how do we manage those bad actors? And it did turn into, as you pointed out, some thoughtful dialogue. And I was lucky because, as I shared, we had a developer in the group that I was in, and they represented their point of view, and I was able to share. They were quite modest about it, but I shared that they are one of these good actors who have taken on tenants. They've created the types of circumstances, both financial and otherwise, to allow people to come in to grow, because they haven't hiked, and in some cases have given below market rents to businesses and academic institutions that have allowed our downtown to start to turn itself around a little bit. So it was great to have not just someone there to represent the point of view of a developer in this conversation, but to actually have one of the good guys in the room that we could point to and emphasize that it is possible to be done, and for them to be able to speak to their firsthand experience.
And look, I am very critical of this private ownership, landlords, all of that. That being said, I am thankful in Brampton there are certain folks who own certain
significant portions of
exactly.
our city.
Because if it weren't them, I know a big box store would come in. I know it'd be sold to a REIT or what have you, and financialized, right? So I am very thankful for these individuals, and there's a lot of openness to diversifying, right? Like when we talked about co-op housing and co-op commercial space, community land trusts as an example. So it was a really robust discussion with a diversity of perspective. So I'm super happy about it.
No, that was great, and I'm really impressed how the day came together. And you and Aaron should be really proud of yourselves. I think it was a fantastic engagement.
Thank you.
And then in addition to all the individual, I think I didn't even keep track. It must have been about 10 individual meetings we had minimum. I think.
At minimum,
And then a reception afterward, where a number of other legislators who weren't able to have individual meetings were able to join the group, and a bunch of community members came out as well.
Yes.
So some fantastic engagement.
I just want to say this.
You're smiling. So there's a good story in there somewhere.
I'll tell you this off camera, but there were certain let's say certain elected officials who clearly came because there was alcohol.
Oh yeah.
And they took their drink and they're like, all right, well, that's that. So it's amazing what good food and alcohol can attract.
Clearly, your first one of these receptions. I've been to many of these receptions, and I can tell you 1,000% that is why the alcohol is there, because otherwise the politicians wouldn't show up. And we will not name names, but at least on recording. But I know a list of politicians for if the beer is there, they will show up, and if not, then you're probably not going to see them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it came together. There's another one of these that are happening next week.
Yes.
We're not organizing this one. Yourself and Boyd, our board chair, are participating in a Queen's Park Advocacy Day being organized by the Ontario Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
And then you and I are going to hopefully take the learnings that we had from this week and next week. And I think we have some ambitions of doing something like this perhaps in the fall.
Yeah.
Maybe Queen's Park. And we've been batting around the idea maybe even of taking a small group out to Ottawa and doing a Parliament Hill Day. Now that we're starting to learn how to do these types of things. But I think these are incredibly useful engagements for us to have, and in particular, and this will lead into the next topic. It's about creating access for members. We have access by dint of our jobs, but if we can leverage that access into our members and other businesses being able to, and other community leaders being able to engage, then I think we're doing real work.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy because the Queen's Park Day is like a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's get into that that next piece then. You spent some time in Ottawa yesterday. You had a crazy week as well, but you were in Ottawa yesterday, and you referenced, you were in Turkey a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they're related. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to on the defense side of things?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'll go back one step further than that, just because it sort of sets the context. But about 2 months ago, we were very fortunate to be able to host here at the Brampton Board of Trade Minister David McGuinty, who is the Minister of National Defence and Security for Canada. So he's the person who holds all the purse strings and the strategy for our national defence strategy. And this was right after the announcement of the national defense and industrialization policy that they've been pulling forward. And this is the federal government's approach to a couple things. It feels like they're trying to solve a couple problems in one swoop.
Yeah.
One of those is how to create more activity in the economy and drive more growth, particularly in sectors such as manufacturing and technology, and create a more global competitiveness, an environment of more global competitiveness. And at the same time, we have issues at the national level around our relationship with the United States and the role there, that we've enjoyed in the past, or the relationship we've enjoyed in the past as a security partner. The United States, by virtue of being the neighbor of the United States and being in the good grace of the United States, means that Canada's sovereignty in many ways is protected by the military force of our neighbors.
Yeah.
Recent geopolitical circumstances have certainly changed that, and the Canadian government no longer feels that we can rely simply on the United States to have our back, particularly when it pertains to issues like Arctic sovereignty. It seems like the United States has as much interest in our Arctic as we do. And to say nothing of other actors in the world who may believe that they have some claim, particularly now in this new world we live in where critical minerals and other natural resources are having even more value than ever. I think there's a Canadian sovereignty piece there. There's a how do we get the economy up and running piece. And then just from a geopolitical piece there in general, Canada has kind of coasted a little bit on our NATO requirements for quite some time. And again, because of our lack of confidence in our relationship with the United States, Canada wants to strengthen and make sure there's no doubt about our relationship with NATO. And part of membership in NATO requires that each of the member nations contributes or makes an investment rather in their own military as a percentage of their GDP. And Canada has traditionally been well below the threshold that qualifies us for NATO. So our government's trying to solve three issues with this one policy. How do we create jobs? How do we make sure we have a defense capability that we can rely upon? How do we make sure that our NATO allies feel like we are an invested NATO ally?
Pulling our weight.
And so to make all those things happen, what the big government is basically choosing to do is say, we're going to invest heavily in the sector of defense and security. And they're putting on the table tens of billions of dollars to that effect. in part so we can hit our spending targets to NATO, but a lot of that is in the form, things we will have to purchase and spend to do so. Much of that will have to come in the short term internationally, because we just don't have a lot of that capability in Canada. The most high-profile example of that is submarines to patrol the Arctic. We don't have the capability of building submarines here in Canada. We need them. They're going to have to come from somewhere else. And right now, the RFP process is in the final stages of a firm in Germany or a firm in Korea. One of those is going to be the provider of Canadian submarines. But over time, what the government is hoping to do is create a defense sector in Canada proper, of contractors and manufacturers and supply chain participants who can actually build out a defense sector, not just for Canadian military and security needs, but ultimately to be a global partner, a global provider in that area. Yeah. And so this is what the minister came by to talk about. There was tremendous interest in the conversation because it drew not just locally. We put that event together very quickly because the minister had a very short window that he was able to make available. However, the event drew widely, and we had folks not just from Brampton, but Vaughan, Mississauga, and all over the West GTA and Toronto attend because there's so much interest, and we were one of the few boards and chambers that were able to book him in. Since that time, my engagement, therefore, in that sector has deepened because I'm seeing the interest from the business community, and in particular because we have so many businesses here in Brampton that are manufacturing, that have capability that have the advanced manufacturing capabilities that sectors like this require, but have been affected adversely by the decline in the automotive sector. In particular, that means we have a lot of businesses here from a manufacturing perspective and supply chain perspective who've been struggling the last couple of years. The Stellantis piece that we've talked about quite a bit on these podcasts is the highest profile example of that. But there's been a softening of the Canadian automotive sector in general, and even Honda made a big announcement a couple of weeks ago that their Alston expansion is not going to happen. So we have a lot of interest in Brampton, not just because the Canadian government in general is saying we want to make investments, but our community has been impacted in an outsized way by other sectors that have softened. So there's a lot of businesses here trying to figure out, how do I become part of this supply chain? How do I sell into this? And to be clear, not everything we're talking about when we talk about defense and security is military, although much of it is. In military in the traditional sense of the word, when you think about tanks, jeeps, and armaments and things of that nature, a lot of it can also be what the government is using this term called dual use, which means that it's an investment in security, stability, sovereignty that may not have a military application, but may be utilized to strengthen Canada's position in general or in a time of conflict. So that's things like cybersecurity, supply chain, healthcare, things of these nature that we may not necessarily consider to be military application, but if there was ever a natural disaster or a global conflict, having these assets would be to Canada's benefit. So there's a certain percentage, so not everything we talk about is necessarily something that would hurt another person, but it's all under this giant umbrella of defense. And so as I've been trying to learn more about this, in order to better engage Brampton businesses in these conversations, it's created some opportunities for me to get more involved in these defense conversations more broadly. So as you shared a couple of weeks ago, I got to go to it was part of a larger Canadian delegation that was able to attend a defense show in Turkey called Saha. It's the largest defense show out in that part of the world. Tens of thousands of individuals coming together to talk about defense capabilities in Europe and Asia. There's a big Canadian contingent there because right now, like as I shared, we are buyers in the Canadian market, in the global market to bring things into Canada. But it was an opportunity to bring a bunch of Canadian businesses and a few Brampton businesses with me to Turkey to have the opportunity to engage in that landscape, understand how it works, but more significantly, spend a lot of time with the many Canadian government officials, particularly on defense procurement that were there, who were able to help me understand, if I were a Brampton business, because my question everywhere I go, I represent a bunch of Brampton businesses, a lot of them have the ability to participate and the desire, how can we sell to the Canadian government? And get those questions answered, in depth over a course of number of conversations. And then that was followed up by this week. There was an event in Ottawa called CanSec. It's actually yesterday and today, which is Canada's version of that. Last year, my understanding, it was about 10,000 people attended that show. Holy. Yeah, way more than you would think. This year, it was 20,000.
Oh my gosh.
And clearly more than the organizers had anticipated,
Wow.
because people were like elbow to elbow. Like if you had a cup of coffee in your hand,
Yeah.
it would absolutely be spilled all over because you were constantly getting jostled.
Oh, geez.
Not because the event was poorly planned. I think they just had a response that way
overwhelming.
exceeded what the organizers. They told us like they had to limit the number of people who could come because there's so much interest in this sector. Primarily Canadians there, and businesses across all different sectors trying to understand how they can get it. And by far, the pavilion that was the most attended, lineups to talk to people, was the Canadian government one, where again, they had opportunities to understand procurement, and they did a brilliant job because they broke it up by sector. So they had specialists there on cybersecurity. They had specialists there from National Research Council. They had specialists there from the mining sector, from manufacturing. So depending on your business or your interest, they had people you could talk to understand, here's the government programs, here's the way into the supply chain, here are the qualification processes, here are the certifications that they're looking for, all of which I spent basically my entire day yesterday in that pavilion, learning as much as I could. We brought about, the city of Brampton was there with about 5 businesses they brought. I went with about 4 businesses that the Board of Trade brought. And I spent most of my day either talking to Canadian government officials to learn what they had to say, or eavesdropping on the conversations our businesses were having with other people, so I could learn about, okay, so this is how that sector works. But the role I see us being able to play as a Board of Trade is now being able to bring that information back to our business community and help people understand how to navigate. So we had that event a couple of months ago, as I shared with the minister. I'm absolutely looking to roll out something in the next few weeks with some of these relationships I've built with the folks on the government procurement side, and doing a series of seminars or roundtables here in Brampton where we can talk about, oh, you're in cybersecurity or technology? Let's talk about what procurement looks like. You're in manufacturing? Here's how you get into part of the supply chain, and so on and so on. But the big headline, and then I'm going to take a breath here, is in as much as the government is trying to be very aggressive and inclusive in this process, and they're making big carve-outs. For instance, if you get a contract to sell to the government, and you have a requirement for your supply chain to be based in Canada, or some of your procurement at least has to be offset, or some of your that contract has to be offset through your own purchasing power in Canada. So they're forcing those who are doing business with the government to ensure that those businesses are in turn doing business with other Canadian firms. Mm-hmm. The reality is that the readiness level, not just of Canadian industry, but more specifically, and this is fascinating to me, Canadian government procurement is not advanced enough to actually deliver on what this government is looking to do.
Oh, interesting.
And it's not a fault of government so much as announcements are happening faster at the rate of policy, they're just happening faster in the rate of bureaucracy. So if you're the easy way to think about this is, we talked about the submarines, no one can build a submarine. But even if it was something that could be procured in Canada, for instance, the nature of Canadian government procurement in that particular area is been designed traditionally to work with large contractors. Think of the de Havillands, the Bombardiers of the world, Brampton's own Rochelle.
Yeah.
Big companies that know how to deal with government and can deliver massive contracts, but more importantly, also have in place due diligence, security, all the supply chain verification, all the vendor verification, all the things that a government needs to feel comfortable, all the testing requirements, background checks that the government needs to feel comfortable to deal with a defense contractor. Well, if you and I have a little machine shop here in Brampton, we may produce quality parts. We may even have the know-how on to build something that may have a military application. But we don't have the financial resources to invest in all that, nor does the government have the mechanisms in place to do the due diligence on thousands and thousands of little companies. So for the time being, in as much as the policy is intended to be inclusive, it will, for the short term, still favor multinational firms and big guys here in Canada. What they're trying to do as a bridging step is to facilitate small companies to work with those larger companies, become part of their supply chain, so at least we can bring those folks in, and they're trying to put incentives in place. And that's what a lot of the Board of Trade program is going to be over the next couple of months, because really now this is not a conversation about government procurement, it's a conversation about connections and collaboration. How can we get 10 small Brampton businesses to be in the supply chain of an MDA or of a Mitsubishi or something like that, while MDA and Mitsubishi go get that government contract, doesn't mean our businesses are shut out.
For sure. Yeah.
How do we build that? And over time, the government in return is going to start building out those pathways so those small businesses can eventually transact directly with the government. And that's kind of where we find ourselves right now.
And I think this is the key, because we've heard in the development industry, as an example, that you can develop a new housing project or a new building, and depending on the relationships of the developer, the architecture firm and
that's right,
the bricks and the wood and whatever that comes in can be from France or somewhere else that isn't Canada. And there are Canadian alternatives, but because those relationships exist elsewhere, we lose out on the opportunity to have something domestic. And so that connection making, I think, is a clear role for the Board of Trade. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think my reaction to this. So I'm trying to figure out exactly how I feel. Putting my feelings about war aside, because
we have lots. To be clear, I am very conflicted at these shows at times because I think I represent a perspective that is, I would guess, is a broader Canadian perspective. And that is, we have never had to think as a nation, at least within our generations, of war as something Canadians do. We have come up with this euphemism of being peacekeepers. And even when we're engaged in global conflicts, we are there at the behest and in the support of other countries who are always the quote unquote good guys. We've been there to support countries pushing back against tyranny and fascism. But that is not how the rest of the world looks at war. And that is not what the defense industry is. It is what you think it is, and it's what I've been seeing. And that is, I'm talking in these sort of euphemistic terms about supply chain and manufacturing. But I have seen tanks and bullets and weapons and rifles and people gleefully talking about these things. And I'm not judging the industry. I'm just acknowledging, for me personally, it does feel very uncomfortable at times.
And the machismo that goes with all of
There's a certain amount of that, to be sure. Not everyone has it. Some people are very matter of fact. I make a thing and it's a widget, and this widget happens to do a thing. But there is, I would say, a lot of testosterone and a lot of glee in some of these products, for sure.
But I guess my reaction to this is, our EV auto sector is being assailed right now, and you referenced Honda, Stellantis in Brampton. There have been countless examples of this, and I guess my reaction is, for the last number of years, we have gone all in on EV. In at least in Ontario, and we've spent tens of millions of dollars supporting that industry. It's sort of under attack at the moment, and there maybe is part of me that's questioning whether the government should have, gone all in on a particular technology or a particular industry. Maybe what was it like, going all in on a Blu-ray instead of the DVD, right? And, both technologies are obsolete. There is part of me that's wondering, are we doing the same thing with defense, where we are extremely reactive to a particular moment in time, and we're putting tens of billions of dollars on the table for something that is that could be very momentary. And I wonder, and I don't know, but I'm sort of caught between this idea of, do we create the conditions for the markets to tell us which industries are worth investing in, or do we pick the winners and losers outright? I'm kind of caught between the two.
No, and I don't disagree. And I've had similar thoughts myself, because I have a lot of these conversations lately. And I'll say two things, and I don't think I'm answering your question, but just sort of maybe a couple more things to think about as part of that conversation. I think in one case for sure, this is where I find some comfort in this idea of dual use. I think the Canadian government, they were very purposeful, and I think I shared with you, when we were promoting the event with Minister McGuinty, his team was on top of me, in part because I'd made the typo the first time round, but making it very clear that the policy must be referred to as the defense and industrial policy. That this government is looking at this as a opportunity for Canadian businesses across sector, and the focus is not on defense. Defense is the alibi to pour this money into the Canadian economy in a general sense.
Yeah.
And this dual use designation that allows us to develop other technologies and come up with other products that are not necessarily defense or not necessarily military. Let's use that as the designation, because defense is sort of this broader thing. They're not military in their application. Gives me a little bit of comfort that this is a broader play. It's not saying we're only going to make EVs. It's saying we're going to invest in technology broadly, and we're going to let the market figure out where this technology goes.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which comes back to the bigger point here, and which is what always been my struggle with the EV strategy, is that I'm of the opinion that the role of government is not to pick winners and losers. It's to create the circumstances and put in place the infrastructure to allow industry to do what it needs to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of EV, I think the provincial government went too far.
Yeah.
They invested in the industry. They picked the companies.
Yes.
And the entire infrastructure was based around a handful of businesses getting a whole bunch of money because the government decided this is exactly what we're going to build. Yeah. Whereas if the government had an EV, like if we wanted to be an EV-oriented province, I would argue because I think that was the right objective. I think what was wrong was what the province chose to do. They chose to give money to large American companies and European companies in the hope that they would build battery factories in Ontario. Yeah. Whereas what we didn't do, which is what we should have done, is to say, hey, how do we put up more charging stations across 400 series highways? Yeah. How do we put in place environmental standards that incentivize people to buy green vehicles? How do we adjust the taxation, reduce the taxation, or the subsidy on tax, and let gas cost what it really costs, so people feel a little bit of pain in the pumps? Yeah. And how about we do an education campaign that lets people know that here are the benefits of driving an electric vehicle? Yeah. Had we done those things, I think we would have a thriving EV industry in Ontario. Yeah. I don't think the government was wrong to prioritize electric vehicles. I think they went about it the wrong way because they did what you said. They picked the winners and losers. They invested in the companies, and they created the supply without creating the demand, and they didn't create the infrastructure. And so now the EV industry is easily wiped away because no one has a reason to drive an EV. Yeah. Gas still, even though it's relatively more expensive than it was a few months ago because of the conflict in the Gulf, it is still very cheap in the grand scheme of things to drive a combustion engine vehicle. It's still cheaper to buy a combustion engine vehicle. Yeah. And if I was to buy an EV, I still wouldn't know where the heck to charge the darn thing. Yeah. Yeah. That was the role for government to play.
I agree, yeah.
So I'm not against government playing a role in trying to incentivize an industry, but create framework and create demand. Yeah. Don't pick a couple companies and then just hope those companies do good things. Yes. Yes. In defense, I'm not saying that they have done or they haven't done that, but it doesn't feel as heavy-handed as the example that you're citing with EVs, in my mind at the very least.
And to your point, that's what an industrial strategy is, right? You're creating the framework, the supply and the demand. You're not just subsidizing an industry.
One company or one sector, absolutely. Yeah. So I don't see it as being as egregious in this case, but I have similar concerns. Yeah. But the thing that gives me some comfort is this notion that I do believe the defense part of this strategy is a little bit of a cover that allows us to get some PR benefit. And make sure that we're checking a box for NATO. Yeah. But I do see this as a broader industrial policy more than a defense policy, in my mind.
No, fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough.
All right, cool. I think we've talked a lot more than we anticipated.
Yeah.
Would you love to end this on a pop culture thoughtful thing?
Yeah.
What have you been consuming? I haven't seen you in forever. What have you been consuming, reading, anything, watching lately?
Honestly, it's been a busy time. I will say I have listened to Iceman.
Okay, yes.
And it's interesting because I think in the GTA when Drake releases any sort of project, it's a cultural event. Yeah. And what I will say is I'm not going to share my opinions on the music or on the individual himself, but what I will say is this fanfare around his light projections on the CN Tower and like the block of ice, which is ridiculous, and him going to City Hall and wearing the mayoral wreath and hanging out in Mayor Chow's office. I think there is a certain kind of cultural capital that gets built when there is someone who does that. I think New York is up right now. Zoran is the New York guy. The Knicks are in the finals. Like
By the way, did you see the Corta, the Arsenal Corta?
Yeah, that was cool.
Amazing,
cool. Yeah.
Amazing.
but yeah, and there's this sort of kind of cultural mystique to New York City. For better or for worse, Drake is that for Toronto.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate is that the city building component of that, the civic pride, if you will, that he engenders, and I can't be mad at that.
Yeah,
that's what I'll say.
I know, and I'm totally down with that. I actually have part of it is I think I'm also recognizing I am of a generation where the pop culture is. I am not part of the culture in the same way anymore. I'm in a different stage of my life now, so I don't have to get it all the time. I don't always get it, but I also realize I don't need to. I appreciate in the way that you're describing that we have an individual who gives our city a certain amount of cachet, and some of it, when I look at it, I'm like, that is so cringy. And some of it's like, I get why that's cool. But at the end of the day, I realize I'm also of a generation where the culture is no longer for me. I get to enjoy the culture, but I'm not of the culture anymore. So I don't have to get it. I just appreciate that this is happening. And that there is someone who is associated with our city and gives us a bit of an identity. As someone who's in a business organization, I will say this, and spends way too much time on LinkedIn, because that's like become my default social media because of my job. The number of anytime something happens in the culture, Drake does a thing. He wears the big fur coat with the the logos on it, and then everyone has to turn this into some kind of like LinkedIn business 10 things I learned from Drake's video, and turn it into some thought leadership BS thing on LinkedIn. That's what drives me crazy. Drake, you go be Drake, and you exist in the world you exist in. It's all these business leaders who are trying to turn the pop culture into these learning moments. What I learned from the Blue Jays that I applied to my management style type stuff. My God, that is cringy, and that's where I draw the line.
That's right. I agree.
For me, well, one of the things I like, I mentioned the trip to Turkey. And then I got a little bit of family time in after that. My favorite part of travel, after the eating and taking in the culture, is between the downtime, time alone in hotel rooms, being on flights, is I finally get to read. Because I'd never seen people to make that happen. I have read about 6 books in the last 3 weeks. It's been amazing. It's been amazing. And the one that I've been dying to tell you about, and I had to write it down because the title's a tongue twister, and I want to make sure I get it right. One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. And it's a book by a gentleman named Omar El-Akkad. He's a novelist, but also a reporter for the Globe and Mail of Egyptian descent. And the book is about what's happening right now in Gaza. And he himself is a refugee from Egypt, came to Canada, and left during the Arab Spring. And draws parallels between so he really it's almost like a series of short essays or snapshots of things that are happening and how basically since October 7th things have been unfolding in Gaza, and framing how our Western media, our North American media, our European media is looking at that, the way our governments are commenting or choosing not to comment, and then contrasting that through various historical lenses, including the Arab Spring, the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, our own Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada. I'm thinking of something else, Black Lives Matter, and pointing out that in the moment, it feels like these issues are gray, or they're nuanced, or they're too politically fraught. But you don't have to take much of a historical lens to see that there's right and wrong in the world. We are just, and he kind of calls out those in the media and those who are in government to take stronger stances. Because, and I'm not even going to tell you which side he's on, although you can probably infer from my commentary, that there is a right and wrong in his mind in this conflict. And even if you disagree with him, I don't think you have to agree with him on what the right side or the wrong side is. I like this idea of saying, look, we actually spend too much time thinking about the ways in which statements will be consumed politically at the expense of taking stands that are morally appropriate. And by contrasting that against historical pieces, historical events, to say, like, this has happened, we have seen this before, and we have all agreed that when we saw it in this context, this was right and this was wrong. Why can we not say right and wrong today? It's an incredibly powerful book. It's a quick read. I knocked out like a day and a half. And I highly recommend it because it will make you think. And it's hard to read it and not feel outraged after. It's an excellent book.
That's a great share. I will definitely put that on the list.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So that's my share.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
All right. So I think we went longer than anticipated, but thank you for an awesome conversation.
Yeah, that's great.
And we'll be back again in a couple of weeks to another one of these. So thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah. Thanks. See you next time.
All right. Talk to you soon.